Welcome to KC Cares. We're Kansas City's nonprofit voice, and we're telling the stories behind Kansas City's nonprofits and the people behind them. KC Cares is the intersection of the nonprofit and profit community, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This KC Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. I'm Ruth Bombigas. There's a whole lot of hate in our world aimed at the other. This attitude of hate has permeated all areas of our society. Among those who have experienced a quadruple increase in hate is the Jewish community and people who are Jewish. Following the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas, anti-Semitism is soaring to new heights. Since the attack, anti-Semitism is up more than 300%. In its State of Anti-Semitism in America report, the American Jewish Committee says 74% of U.S. adults say anti-Semitism is a problem. 63% of American Jews say the status of Jews in the U.S. is less secure than just 1 year ago. Well, right here in Kansas City, there has been a 500% increase in reports of anti-Semitism since the Israel-Hamas war broke out. It's the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee, that receives these calls and works to deal with them. How does this nonprofit work to calm this rising tide of hate? We're going to find out with our guest today, Netta Meltzer. She is the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee, Director of Community and Government Relations. Netta, thanks for joining us today to really dive into an important subject that, you know, it's not the most lighthearted, but it's so vital to have this discussion. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me and for covering this subject, as tough as it is.
Well, for folks who may not know the work of JCRB, AJC, we're going to go by the acronym here. Can you kind of outline for us what does the nonprofit in a normal period of time deal with?
Yes, absolutely. So it's a lot of letters. The Jewish Community Relations Bureau, AJC, we serve as the Jewish community advocate for combating anti-Semitism and pursuing justice. That's very high level, the core of what we do. And we have a few different areas that we focus on in order to do those things. So of course, we represent the Jewish communities of Kansas and Western Missouri in matters of public policy. We do proactive education to prevent anti-Semitism and reactive in order to address anti-Semitism where we find it as well. And we build relationships with our neighbors of all faiths, of all backgrounds throughout the community to promote greater understanding and to really encourage an environment in which hate just cannot thrive. And so those are the three main approaches that we take to meeting that mission.
And I said in a normal time, in quotes, because it's not, quote, been that for some time. But let's go pre-war. Sure. What are the kinds of things, for example, you and your colleagues were really doing? What kind of work? I mean, what does day-to-day look like for you?
Well, every day is going to be a little bit different, but you'll find, our Director of Education and Programs, Sarah Markowitz-Schreiber, out in the community providing trainings, working with school districts, working with DEI departments and corporations to really help folks understand the phenomenon of anti-Semitism in depth. You'll find me working with our elected officials and with our community leaders to, create those partnerships, create those relationships, and ensure that we're all working together against a form of hate that really impacts us all. I think that before the war, already we were seeing steadily increasing numbers of anti-Semitic incidents being reported, even in the past 5 to 7 years. And the war just really sort of took that and amplified it even further. But this has been an issue that has really deserved our awareness and our focus for some time now. It's been steadily increasing for several years.
Before I ask the question of why, let's work with a definition so our audience understands what is anti-Semitism when we're talking about it with your organization. How's that defined?
Right. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception, or even an outright hatred of Jews and things that might be associated with the Jewish community. We work with what's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. We call it the IRA definition for short. And you'll hear us talking about the IRA definition all the time, because the thing that's really important to understand about anti-Semitism is that it does not behave quite the same way that other forms of hate behave. When you think of racism, when you think of, homophobia, xenophobia, those types of sentiments, those are types of hate that we are able to really easily recognize in our community. We're able to call them out, we're able to fight against them. Anti-Semitism is a little bit trickier. It's a form of hate that's really rooted in conspiracy theory. It's a form of hate that sort of shape shifts and morphs depending on the time and the environment that it finds itself in. It's a type of hate that really scapegoats a community, and specifically the Jewish community, and uses that community to sort of symbolize whatever a certain group may abhor or may find detestable. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we think about anti-Semitism. That's why we have the IRA definition and several examples that the definition goes through to help us understand that, it's not just somebody saying, oh, I hate this group. I don't believe that this group has a right to X, Y, or Z. It's a lot more complex. And so that's why one of the core approaches that we take in dealing with anti-Semitism is education, because in order to fight it, we have to be able to recognize it. And in order to recognize it, we have to know that it behaves a little bit differently than other forms of hate.
Can you give us an example of what would be anti-Semitic?
I can give you a lot of examples since we see them all the time, unfortunately. But I think one thing that we don't often think of when we think about anti-Semitism, and something that the war has really brought up, is the question of Israel. And so something that I think is really important to be clear on is that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic necessarily. But when we get to a point where we say Israel, uniquely among the nations, does not have a right to exist, the Jewish people of all the people do not have a right to self-determination, that's when it kind of falls over that line to where it becomes anti-Semitic. And that's something that is, really relevant today, because we're seeing a lot of activism around the war. And it's one thing to disagree with policies or practices or certain decisions happening within the Israeli government. But again, when we get to that point where then it's Israel doesn't have the right to exist, that's something we simply don't say about other countries. And so you have to think about it a little bit differently and understand that that sentiment is a modern iteration of anti-Semitism. Anti-Zionism can be understood as a modern iteration of anti-Semitism.
Again, I want to make sure people understand terms. How is Zionism defined in terms of this discussion of anti-Semitism?
That's a really important question, and something that's really important for us to touch on, because I do know that Zionism is a word that has had a lot of connotations applied to it.
Right.
And so we really lost the meaning of what Zionism is. And so I have a very simple and straightforward definition that is, easy to remember and just really gets to the core of it. Zionism is the movement for Jewish liberation and self-determination in some portion of our ancestral homeland, which is where Israel is today. Jewish liberation and self-determination in some portion of our ancestral homeland. If I say I'm a Zionist, what that tells you is that I believe that Israel has the right to exist. It doesn't tell you what I think about, Palestinian liberation. It doesn't tell you what I think about the settlements in the West Bank. It doesn't tell you what I think about the Israeli government and their leadership and their decisions. All it tells you when I say that I'm a Zionist is that I believe that Israel, where I was born, has a right to exist. And then we can have other discussions about the nuance and complexity around it. But the term Zionism, unfortunately, has really been appropriated and had all of these additional meanings applied to it that have nothing to do with what the Zionist movement, really intended to do, which was to create a home for the Jews of the world in their ancestral homeland. So we have to be really clear about that word and what it means when we use it.
I appreciate you doing these definitions, because I just, in everything that has gone on for modern history, at least, and predating that, people don't understand or have never been told. Let's be fair to hear what definitions of some of these terms are.
Right.
So your organization is focused, day to day, to deal with those kinds of things as they come up. I know you deal a lot with the schools. So how does JCRB AGC overall engage with schools? We have separation of church and state. So why are you engaging in the schools?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's about, every school has a responsibility, and certainly really is invested in the safety of the students within their community. And so for us, it's all about building relationships and really helping serving as a resource, serving as a partner. Like I said, anti-Semitism is something that, unless you deeply understand it, you may not always recognize it when it's right in front of you. And so what we're there to do is say, let's get really clear on this very complex form of hate. Let's provide you with all the resources, all the tools that you need. If something happens, if you have a question, if you're not sure, we are here to provide support, to serve as a resource, to help kind of think through next steps to ensure that safety. For us, it's about safety for every student, and that includes Jewish students. And so it's about relationship building and really just being that partner that they can turn to anytime they need something, and having that long-term connection to continue working together to build those safer environments over time.
And then when you talk about working with elected officials, local, state, I think you even sometimes connect federally. Frame for us what that is in terms of what in these pre-war times has looked like.
Yeah. I mean, we are always trying to connect, trying to build relationships to ensure that any issue that touches the Jewish community in some way, that there's an understanding of what the impact of that might be. So if there's a bill on the table or a resolution that we want to discuss, we just want to have those relationships and those connections to say, hey, I just want you to know what this might mean to us, how this might affect us, maybe help doing some of that reading between the lines, because again, we want to make sure we're recognizing implications and dog whistles and things like that. And so I can't overstate how important the role of our elected leaders are. They are, an authority in our society, and we want to be a partner to them to help ensure that they understand all the issues, that they feel supported. If they have questions or need a partner, we're here for them, just like we are with the schools. And those relationships are so important to us.
All right, we're gonna dive back into the anti-Semitism issue. It's on the rise. It's been on the rise. What are your national partners, who I think you rely on for a lot of the research and the data? Why are we seeing this? And then we'll go from October 7th. Why is this up so much in our country?
Anti-Semitism is something that we can kind of think of as a virus. It never really goes away. It kind of emerges in times of maybe anxiety in a society, or economic insecurity, or deep division and polarization. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think, in addition to sort of the environment that allows anti-Semitism to escalate, we have social media, which can be a really wonderful tool for making connections, but it can also change the way that we engage with information. It can influence the way that we learn and the way that we advocate. We have a lot of folks out there in the world who maybe don't have as much context or history of anti-Semitism, of Israel, of the Jewish people, and who and what we are. And unfortunately, with social media, folks will pick up an potentially oversimplified or fully inaccurate narrative, and it just can go viral very easily. And so that that environment, that information environment, I think also is
Mhm.
something that's a little bit of an uphill battle for us. The emphasis on content that provokes outrage, over content that encourages, contemplation and complexity and consideration. That's a struggle as well. And so there's a lot of different elements sort of interacting together to create an environment that's been quite challenging in the last several years.
It almost sounds like we're having a COVID of anti-Semitism.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely. I mean, it really is, we use that metaphor of the virus a lot, because again, like, it's not that anti-Semitism will one day end necessarily, but it is something that we do want to make sure people are really educated about and that we're sort of keeping it in check, because when it spirals out of control, it can have real consequences for human safety. And so, yeah, it's almost like a surge of a very um, contagious strain of the virus in this moment, certainly.
so numbers have been going up, and then we have the attacks in Israel. I'm going to take a slight detour for our folks, since
Sure.
we are talking in the nonprofit community. You all are a nonprofit. I
Yeah.
think full disclosure, you came on board
Yeah.
officially at JCRB in the midst of all of this. So, what was onboarding like in a time of, we got to be doing the work?
Yeah, there was I jumped in. I have jumped in. I mean, there really wasn't a moment to lose in my experience joining JCRB. I was working in the Jewish communal space before, but I wanted to move into this role because I was born in Israel, but I grew up here in Kansas City. This work is really personal to me. This community means a lot to me, and so I have jumped in. There hasn't really been a moment to lose, and it's been. I mean, jumping into a new role can be, exciting and thrilling. I think there's just been this added layer, though, of course, of like the urgency of this moment and the gravity of it too. It's been a lot.
We're talking with Netta Meltzer with Jewish Community Relations Bureau, American Jewish Committee, and congratulations on surviving that 2-second onboarding at your nonprofit. Probably not the way most nonprofits would like to do it, but I think it shares a good point. When there is a crisis, you just learn what you got to do really quickly. So,
Right.
note to self, nonprofits, just, onboarding is important, but sometimes you just got to keep the train going down the tracks. So
Sure.
here we are. This terrorist attack happens in Israel. We're in full blown out war there. What is your organization doing? What are you charged with doing in this very loaded world dynamic we're in?
Yeah. You know, I do want to say that this is not like a normal time for the Jewish community. It's not, we've seen escalations in the violence in the Middle East before. We always know that that results in increased incidents of anti Semitism globally and certainly locally. We knew to expect that, but there's two differences. One is that, this was not just a 2 week, May of 2021 thing that kind of died down rather quickly. The scale of the attack and the brutality of it is something that we will carry that with us as a community for the rest of our lives. It's not like anything we've seen before in recent memory. So there's that. And then, the response to it, both in terms of some of the really disappointing, sort of equivocating or justifying of the attacks, has been really painful. And in the meantime, our community is also facing these um, already rising levels of anti-Semitism, and then October 7th happens. And I would love to share just one example of to kind of capture what that means. Between October 7th and December 7th, the Anti-Defamation League recorded over 2,000 incidents of anti-Semitic activity, whether it's violence, vandalism, harassment. There was a fatality at a rally. That's a couple months, right? 3-month period. And that same time period, they had recorded 465 in 2002 anti-Semitic incidents. And so they're recording almost the same amount that they would get in an entire year in the span of October 7th to December 7th. So when we say anti-Semitism skyrocketed after October 7th, that's what we mean. And as you mentioned in your intro, we saw about 500% increase in the amount of reports that we regularly get. And so our work, everything that we're doing now, we were thinking about before. So like the education at the schools, the work with our elected officials. We're working now a lot with our higher education partners because college campuses are such a area of concern in this post-October 7th environment. But the work has just been even more urgent, even more relevant, and we have to keep our heads down and charge forward to really meet the moment.
So you're really in crisis management at this point.
Yeah.
You're doing some things. I would love for you to share something very exciting that's coming up that you are doing this spring. Tell us about the upcoming summit.
We're so excited about this just because of how meaningful this is. So to back up, I say anti-Semitic incidents have been on the rise for several years. We all remember April of 2014 when a anti-Semitism fueled shooting occurred on the Jewish community campus here in Overland Park, Kansas, and in the Village Shalom parking lot, the Jewish retirement facility. And we had been thinking about that and how to sort of commemorate that and honor what happened there. And so we had been planning our very exciting Driving Out Darkness in the Heartland 2024 Summit on combating anti-Semitism. Even before October 7th, this was something that we wanted to do because we're just so, education is such a critical part of our work, and relationship building is such a critical part of our work. And so we wanted to bring those things together to really bring the community together around this really devastating anniversary and try to bring some progress forward. And so we had two elements to this summit. We have our Unity Seder, where we bring our community and our interfaith partners together, and we all share in the Jewish Passover Seder ritual, and it helps us to build bridges and really foster understanding, even greater understanding between all of the different communities that live together here in this region. And then following that, we have our day-long symposium that we're really excited about. And we have national speakers and local leaders speaking on topics ranging so widely from, Israel and Zionism, as we spoke about earlier, to online extremism and media literacy, students and school environments, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and sort of where the Jewish community fits into those frameworks. And so we have those two events back to back, starting the evening of April 15th and then the day of April 16th. And we are hoping that leaders and stakeholders and anyone in the community who really wants to deeply understand this phenomenon of anti-Semitism and help us work together, take tangible action to combat this form of hate. We just hope you'll join us and be a part of that. I believe it's the first of its kind summit on anti-Semitism in our region. We're really proud, and we hope that folks will join us for it.
So how can folks go find out the details of that, potentially register?
Yep.
Where do they go?
JCRBAJC.org, and right at the top there in the menu, you'll see Driving Out Darkness in the Heartland. You can learn all about it. You can read about the different sessions that we're going to be hosting. AJC's CEO Ted Deutsch will be there presenting. We'll have so many wonderful, fascinating, and insightful experts joining us for so many panels. Learn all about it on our website, register on our website, connect with us directly if you have questions or just want to kind of talk about it further, but everything at jcrbajc.org.
So you're moving in this really hot time in history. Now we put an election on top of it and all of those kinds of things. At the end of the day, if someone comes to this summit or the Seder, one or the other, or even both, what do you hope happens? What's the change that you want to see?
What we want to see is we really want to see the Midwest as a national leader in taking tangible action steps to combat anti-Semitism. The Midwest is a really unique region in our country. We face different challenges than they might face on the coasts or in different parts of the country. Mm-hmm. We have different communities, and we have a national strategy, the White House strategy to counter anti-Semitism, and we are going to be looking at that strategy in tandem with all of these sessions and all this education and all of this bringing of leaders and stakeholders together. We're literally going to be sitting there with the strategy and talking about, well, what are we going to do? Let's talk about implementing this. Let's figure out what this looks like in our region. And I would love to see the Midwest positioning ourselves as really taking lead in a really intentional way to say, not in our region, this form of hate will not thrive. Hate against anybody will not thrive in our region. We will not have it. And so let's take steps. Let's make plans. Let's draw up, the blueprints and start to make real change and just really be leaders in that space. That's what I'm hoping to see.
Some people might say, isn't this just a Jewish problem?
Yeah.
How would you all come back?
It may seem that way, it may start that way, but we've all heard the phrase canary in the coal mine. When we see anti-Semitism thriving in a society, that indicates other issues within that society, other really existential issues in that society. It's not just a Jewish problem. And what I really loved, you mentioned the 2023 State of Anti-Semitism in America report. What I really loved about that report, there were a lot of really striking and concerning and alarming statistics that came out of that. But 92% of US adults believe that anti-Semitism affects society as a whole, and everyone is responsible for combating it. That was what was found in that report. That we all understand that if anti-Semitism forms the core of white supremacy and white nationalism, it forms the core of other forms of hate. It's connected to other forms of hate. It foments other forms of hate. It's just the beginning, right? And so it is on all of us. We all have a stake in this. We all have a role to play. And we all benefit from a society in which anti-Semitism is not allowed to thrive.
Again, you're a team. You've got 5 on staff, I believe.
4, and we have some part-time help as well.
Just again, want you to remind us where people can go and find out information so that they can become more knowledgeable and connect with you all. Absolutely. Where's the best place?
JCRBHAC.org, and we are so eager to connect with everyone and to talk more about this. I know it's complex. I know it's heavy, but that's what we're here for. We're here to be a partner. We're here to be a resource, and we're eager to connect with everyone.
Thank you, Netta, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me and for all that you do.
Thank you for joining us on Casey Cares. We're Kansas City's nonprofit voice, and we're produced by a nonprofit called Charitable Communications. This Casey Cares segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. If you'd like to be a guest on Casey Cares, Visit our website, kccaresonline.org, and spread the love. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at KC Cares Radio and on Instagram at KC Cares Online. Don't forget, you can catch us on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on ESPN 1610 AM and 94.5 FM. Thank you for joining us on KC Cares.